The committee will now consider H.R. 5637, the American Jobs Matter Act of 2010, which was introduced by Representative Christopher Murphy. This bill would allow federal contracting officers to review information about the impact on American jobs when awarded a federal contract. H.R. 5637 authorizes contractors to submit a jobs impact statement with their offers, which explains the effects on jobs within the United States. If the contract is awarded to the contractor, the job impact statement may include such information as the number of jobs expected to be created or retained by the contractor, the number of jobs expected to be created or retained by the subcontractors, and a guarantee that any jobs created or retained will not be moved outside of the United States. This bill allows contracting officers to consider the information supplied by a contractor, its job impact statement, and the evaluation of an offer. And the contracting officer may request further information to verify the information submitted by the contractor. Additionally, the bill requires the head of each executive agency to submit an annual report to Congress on how frequently the agency uses job impact statements in the evaluation of competitive proposals. I urge the members of the committee to support this very good legislation, of course, and I recognize the ranking member for his comments at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And although this markup is going very smoothly, and I expect it to continue, I would like to express some concern on the American Jobs Matter Act. The reason being that, as you know, this is a complex subject. The Special IG has repeatedly showed us that, for the TARP, that jobs created or saved is in fact difficult or perhaps impossible to actually achieve. Notwithstanding that controversy in the impact statement, I do believe that the attempts and the intent of this bill are worth us exploring, amending, and going forward with. It is unclear how a contracting officer should use the jobs of this impact statement. It is also unclear how often someone would use the impact statement in order to tout the amount of jobs they're creating or save, only to have those jobs creatively disappear after the bill is in. Congresswoman Speer of California, I understand, will be offering a good amendment, one that I believe will bring further reporting and accountability. Additionally, the minority will be offering some amendments. We believe all of these amendments can coexist in a final bill, along with additional work that the majority and minority can do over the break. I believe that getting it right, at least sending out a clear signal that we do care about claims made of American jobs and claims and the fact after the fact that those jobs in fact were saved, that people were employed. I would mention that there are many things that we're concerned about on both sides of the aisle. One of them is not just jobs. We're also very concerned about American competitiveness and efficiency. So notwithstanding any jobs claims in contracting, I hope that on a bipartisan basis we understand that half as many jobs producing a better product through automation and other efficiencies often create opportunities far greater than the jobs lost. If it weren't for that, horse and buggy, steam power, and the like would still be the law of the land, because in fact often destroying jobs but creating prosperity allows for new and previously unheard of jobs to occur. Most of us in America, millions, operate in the service industry and other areas only made possible by the wealth and success of our efficiencies in agriculture, manufacturing, and mining over the many decades before us. So as we see 5.5 million jobs lost in America, I would certainly say that if those jobs were due to greater efficiency, there would be a resurgence in America. If they're due to less efficiency, no amount of make-work jobs will ever correct that loss. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working on this in order to ensure that contracting look at the right things, including jobs retained in America, and yield back the balance of my time.
I'd like to thank the gentleman for his statement. I now yield to the gentleman from Connecticut, and I want to commend him on this outstanding legislation that he's put forward. Recognize him for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank the ranking member for his comments, and look forward to several of the amendments that will be offered today, which I agree with the ranking member. I think will strengthen components of this legislation offered by both the minority and the majority side. Listen, this bill represents a pretty simple concept, the concept that the number of American jobs created should matter when awarding federal work. Manufacturing in particular in this country is under assault, and it's under assault for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that our historic commitment to using taxpayer dollars, which largely come through the military purchasing program, because our historic commitment to using those dollars to buy goods from American manufacturers is being eviscerated by a process of waiver applications that have sent billions and billions of dollars in federal work overseas. Just in the past 2 years, 100,000 waivers to the Buy America Act have been allowed and granted. Which means that less and less of our U.S. taxpayer dollars are going to U.S. manufacturers. This bill would simply say that a contractor applying for federal work has the ability to include as part of his application a statement on how many jobs here in the United States are going to be created by that particular application, and that then the agency has the ability to use that job impact statement as one part of the criteria for awarding that contract. Frankly, when I talk about this idea to my constituents, they're amazed that it's not already on the books. They're amazed that we don't consider as a factor already the amount of U.S. jobs that are going to be created. As we try to continue this economic recovery, we can just use existing authorized dollars in a smarter way to grow American jobs. I would add also that I think there's a strong national security component to this legislation. As we continue to move defense production and defense manufacturing overseas, we are compromising this country's national security. This has been a long-term trend, one that we need to reverse. And by giving or allowing for some priority for bids that produce more of a particular military good here in the United States, we're not only adding to our economic recovery, we're not only protecting and growing jobs here in the United States, but I think we're also adding to our defense industrial base and adding to the protection of our own nation. So I'd like to thank the Chairman for bringing this bill up. I'd like to thank my primary co-sponsors on this legislation, Mr. Jones, Mr. Manzullo, Mr. Kritz, and again, look forward to the debate and look forward to amendments being worked on today. I yield back.
And thank you, gentleman, for his comments, and thank you for his work. Any other members seeking recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Just a moment. I'll call up the bill. 1 second. I now call up H.R. 5637. Without objections, the bill is considered as read. Open for amendment at any time. Okay.
H.R. 5637, a bill to amend the Federal Property and Administrative Services Act of 1949 and Title 10, United States Code.
Without objections, the bill is considered as read and open for amendments. From California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you and the ranking member, Issa, for your support of this very simple amendment. And I commend Congressman...
Clerk will now designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5637, offered by Ms. Spear of California.
And I commend Congressman Murphy of Pennsylvania for introducing it. And like he commented, I think that we should have had this on the books long ago. So this particular amendment just builds on what is in Mr. Murphy's bill by requiring the contractor that actually gains the award of the contract, who has used the opportunity to submit a job impact statement, requires them to report 6 months after the award of the contract the number of full-time equivalent jobs that were added or retained that otherwise would have been lost as a result of not being awarded the contract. It also requires this report be made to Congress, and the amendment also authorizes agencies to take into account the accuracy of these reporting statements when issuing or renewing contracts with the reporting contractor. I yield back.
Would the gentlelady yield for a question?
I certainly will.
I thank the gentlelady. Would you envision that, from a technical standpoint, if this amendment is adopted, that it would become a reporting requirement under the past performance information already required, that it would be folded into that on an ongoing basis?
Yes.
I thank the gentlelady. Yield back.
I agree with the Spear Amendment. I believe it improves the bill, and I am prepared to support it. If no other members wish to speak on the amendment, the question is on adopting the Spear Amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Recognize the gentleman from California. Clerk will now designate the amendment.
We don't have it yet.
I'm sorry.
You have the amendment? No?
They do. Do they have it now?
Now we do. Amendment to H.R. 5637, offered by Mr. Issa of California. Page 3, line 13, strike the...
Mr. Chairman, I
closing
ask unanimous
quotation
consent
marks,
the amendment be
second period.
considered as read.
Without objections.
Mr. Chairman,
So ordered.
this amendment, like Congresswoman Spear's amendment, is intended to provide consequences for contractors who overstate, inflate the number of jobs created, allowing the agency to deal with those who will make inflated claims, and then ultimately, when reporting under Ms. Spear's recommendation, perhaps come up short. We believe that it is difficult, if not impossible, to define jobs created or saved. On the other hand, it is not difficult nor impossible to report jobs used. So under Congresswoman Spear's amendment that has now been adopted, we believe that putting real teeth into the after action for consideration would be appropriate, including that the agency may, and I repeat, may use all normal evaluation means, including debarment in the case of the most flagrant violations. The example that I would certainly want to put into the record is if somebody claims they're going to use 1,000 people and then effectively use none by exporting it, and 6 months later, upon reporting, either honestly or dishonestly, it is discovered that in fact they did not even begin to meet that requirement, I certainly believe that that would be appropriate for debarment. So, Mr. Chairman, we simply believe that this amendment puts the kind of a teeth, although it's a may and not shall, that would allow for contractors who have been seriously lied to after award, even if they cannot take back the contract, to have the kind of punitive requirements for future contracts necessary. As the Chairman knows, sometimes a contract is a one-time contract. So when 1,000 items are delivered and no jobs are created, the only capability they have when they've been lied to about jobs that are going to be used here in America would be these kinds of extreme means. And so I would urge support for this amendment that does give opportunity for teeth, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentlemen, for his statement. Any other members seeking recognition?
Sure.
Gentlemen.
Yeah, it's
Illinois.
my understanding that if the contractor made a 20% estimate, error in the estimate, he could lose 20% of the payment for the contract? Is it, then I'm not reading it correctly. Okay. What would be the implications of making, say, a 20% error in the estimate?
Well, in our case, this amendment would say that if that were far enough in the opinion of the agency, they could not allow further contracts to go to that individual. Obviously, and if the gentleman will continue yielding, we expect that there will be fluctuations in the actual amount of jobs that are going to be used, but we're simply saying that if it's an extreme case, that this would be a tool that would be available.
Okay, this is the amendment that was just distributed to me? Am I reading the correct one? This is the page 3, line 13.
If the gentleman would allow me to make a terrible mistake right, the text you've received is different than the one that I thought we were amending. Okay.
I think the question is, where is the amendment?
What amendment is on? Not the one I'm talking about.
Did you hand out the wrong amendment, or did you change it?
Okay, if I can switch talking points to the right one, Mr. Chairman, I apologize.
I'd be delighted to recognize you to do that.
Wait a second, where's the right text? Chairman, why don't you give me the right talking points for the text they got? To answer the gentleman's question, and I apologize that for the amendment that was issued, so that we not have to reissue, you're correct that they could be forced to repay based on a ratio, up to a ratio of what they said they were going to create. They didn't. It does put a financial onus. It's not a requirement, but it does allow for it.
Yeah, my worry there is that that would result in a significant increase in the cost for contracts, that the taxpayers simply wouldn't get as good a deal as they, if even a 20% error in the estimate of the number of people ultimately employed, which to my mind is in the range of a reasonable error, would result in a potential 20% loss in the payment, which would be a huge loss in the profit for the contract.
Let me make this suggestion. Why don't we withdraw this at this time, and you can let them continue to sort this out, and let us go to the next amendment, and we'll come back to you. How's that?
I would ask unanimous consent to withdraw that amendment, and could we get the right amendment?
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, recognize the gentleman from Ohio.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk, report the amendment.
I think this is a reference, Amendment 3. That's what I have. It's a Jordan amendment, obviously.
Thank you. Amendment to H.R. 5637, offered by Mr. Jordan of Ohio.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and I recognize the gentleman from Ohio for 5 minutes to explain.
Thank you,
this
Chairman.
amendment.
This amendment's real simple. It would strike the phrase, in every instance from the bill, the phrase "jobs retained." The committee will probably remember a few months back we had hearings about the stimulus bill, and in particular the recovery.gov website and those who were responsible for the information on that website. We learned in that hearing about some of the crazy accounting for how those dollars were spent, the phantom congressional districts, et cetera. We also have heard that for the first time we have this new phrase, jobs saved or jobs retained. Very first time we've used that in any type of accounting with the federal government. In fact, during those hearings, I asked one of the witnesses who had 30 years with the GAO if in his tenure at the GAO he ever had used the term jobs saved or jobs retained, and his statement on the record was no, this is the first time it had ever been used. Respected economists like Mr. Alan Meltzer have said, quote, "One can search economic textbooks forever without finding a concept called jobs saved. It doesn't exist." Another economist, prestigious economist Greg Mankiw, has called it a non-measurable metric. So this simply says, look, the American people get the joke. They know that this is a term totally made up, no way to measure. Let's not further this by including it in this good piece of legislation. Let's just get rid of that and talk about jobs that are created, not jobs that are, quote, saved or retained. This amendment removes that requirement for government contractors to perpetuate this fiction that was created in the Stimulus Act. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back and urge a yes vote on the amendment.
And I recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Congressman Murphy,
Thank you, Mr.
for
Chairman.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speak in opposition to the amendment. The fact is that American manufacturing is under assault today, and I wish it wasn't the case, but we are losing jobs at a rapid rate in many of our manufacturers. Many of those manufacturers are bidding for U.S. government work, and I wish it were the case that every single applicant for a U.S. contract was going to be simply adding jobs as a result of that contract. But because much of their other work is leaving, because they are losing revenue in other parts of their business, often that contract that they're receiving from the federal government might not add net jobs, might actually retain jobs that they were planning on laying off due to other losses within their manufacturing business. I think it is absolutely measurable. I think Ms. Spears' amendment puts teeth into this to allow for the agency to track whether or not those jobs are truly retained in the long run. But I think in this context, in which so many manufacturers across this country are losing jobs due to the loss of many private contracts, it's entirely appropriate for us to allow them to assess the number of jobs that would have been lost due to other business decreases that will be retained by the awarding of a particular federal contract. I think it's an appropriate measurement. I think it's something that can be done, and I, for that reason, would oppose the amendment.
Gentleman from Louisiana.
Yes, I'd like to speak in support of Mr. Jordan's amendment. I believe that we, as a body, has a duty to the American people to be as transparent as possible, and to take cover behind a phrase that many economists have stated to be immeasurable. I believe speaks loudly of how inadequate we are as a body to convey directly to the people what the bills that we pass intend to do. I believe that we have to approach our work as a body that represents the American people to be as transparent and as truthful to the American people as possible. And I believe that Mr. Jordan's amendment will enable us to do that. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just point out that this amendment from my colleague from Ohio would give credit to a manufacturer who fired employees, then hired them back. And so this would actually encourage the firing of employees and the rehiring of employees in order to get credit, rather than just allowing the employees to stay on the payroll and be retained. That seems a bit nonsensical to me. I don't think we should be encouraging employers to fire their employees and then hire them back in order to get credit on a government contract.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Chafee from Utah. Gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do support the Jordan amendment. I have a fundamental challenge with the bill as a whole because I do think it lacks definition and incentivizes some gamesmanship along the way. I appreciate the gentleman's concern about manufacturing, and that is a bigger, broader discussion on how do we make our own domestic manufacturing capabilities and assets and resources, the infrastructure that we have in this country, more competitive. I think that is a bigger, broader discussion. And I do share that goal that I want to make them more competitive. But in this bill, the way it is currently stated, it lacks definition on all fronts. The administration went way out there in terms of creating this new term of jobs saved. They have had every incentive to try to come up with a definition for that, and ultimately they came to the conclusion that they couldn't do it. They went out there on a limb, and a lot of us criticized them for that. They had every incentive to try to come up with a definition and a metric, and every expert that we heard from pretty much said, we can't determine it, and they eventually abandoned it. And so unless there has been some new revelation, some new thing that has come about in a way to actually define what this term is supposed to mean, I think we have an obligation to follow the lead of the administration and abandon this term. I just can't see any way to actually define it. And I have concerns about how we define other parts of it, but particularly this point. And if you have a suggestion on how to define that, let's talk about it. But we want to create an even playing field that is predictable, that everybody is playing from the same set of rules. And the way the bill is currently construed, I don't see that. I don't see the clear definition where everybody's playing by the same rules. As laudable as the goal might be, if you don't come up with the definition of it, then I can't see how we move forward with it.
Any other members seeking recognition on?
Yield back. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lukemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Missouri.
Speak in favor of the amendment. Have some grave concerns about the bill as a whole, and I think just the thought process that the sponsor continues to go that counting jobs somehow makes us more competitive in the manufacturing field on a world basis. I mean, I have a hard time following the logic on that. And here we are with a word, a phrase, a definition in this bill that actually adds to the gamesmanship of how they do things with counting these things. Whenever you allow somebody to say jobs retained and you can't prove that, does that mean that somebody, if he's got one contract says 200 jobs that are saved or retained, and the next guy says 800 jobs are saved or retained, does that give him an edge when it comes to awarding of these contracts? If there's no follow-up to this, there's no way to prove it, you're going to have all kinds of gamesmanship whenever you start putting these numbers in here. I think this is, while it may be well-intentioned, I think that there's a whole lot of problems with counting people and awarding contracts based on as one of the criteria for doing that. I think it really opens us up to a lot of problems down the road that we don't really need to get into. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
On this side, recognize the gentleman from California.
Chairman, I'll be brief. I would hope that all three of the minority amendments are put into the bill for a couple of reasons, and one of them is one of the later amendments that I'll be offering, in fact, does go a long way to Mr. Driehaus and other concerns that we establish sets of criteria. We allow the professionals to establish sets of criteria because just like the gentleman from Ohio said, well, what if somebody were to fire and rehire? Well, under the FAR rules, we could, in fact, ensure that they define what a new employee is or not. But more importantly, having been a small employer or an employer of less than 400 workers, I recognize very, very much that you often, as a smaller employer, don't have the ability to simply say, well, let's put up a new factory and hire new people to meet this contract. You get a small contract, what you do is you put your people on overtime. And so we're going to undoubtedly have the professional community ask us to help them modify this, and I hope we can get input before this goes to the floor, to define these U.S. job hours and full-time job equivalents in a way that they can work with. So one of the things the later amendment does is it actually calls on the FAR Council to establish regulations. If they need further, when we're done amending this bill today, if they need further clarification, I look forward to working with the chairman on a final manager's amendment that meets their requirements so that when they go to implement the concept of this bill, they can do so with rules that they can understand that would prevent or limit gamesmanship. And with that, I yield. Of course I would.
Just to say that I think the gentleman's very right that in one of the amendments that I think he'll be offering to have the FAR implement the provisions of this bill, that does make the bill better, and that will lend some certainty to the implementation of the bill. I think we also, though, can look to how states have done this. Though the federal government does not currently assess job impacts in the United States, I think wrongly, when awarding contracts. Many state governments do that. Many state governments track jobs in connection with particular grant awards that they've given economic development assistance. I think there's plenty of experiential data out there to teach us how to do this, and I think with a future amendment that we'll be adopting, will allow the people who are experts in this to make it right.
I thank the gentleman, and I support the gentleman's amendment, and yield back the balance of my time, Chairman.
Any other members seeking recognition? I do not support the Jordan amendment, and of course, the information he seeks to take out from this bill is important to leave in it. So on that note, I would like to ask the members of the committee to vote no. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those vote no. That appears of the chair. That the opinion of the chair. The noes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
And the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, respectfully ask for a roll call.
The gentleman asked for a roll call.
Yeah. Mr. Towns.
No. Let me just say, why don't we just hold the roll call vote until we finish everything else, and then we'll have the roll call.